All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this debate. I'm glad you found this room because this building is challenging, to say the least. This debate has the title, How Civil Society can Contribute to Effective Chairmanship of OGP. And when I read it, I thought, well, it's a bit more nuanced, right? We are talking about OGP, partnership. So it's more, how can we get a good partnership going between civil society and government for the chairmanship of OGP the coming 2 years. So that's what we want to talk about. And we have a whole lineup of distinguished guests, both from government and civil society side, and both from the two countries that are going to chair OGP, Indonesia and Mexico, as well as some experts from the civil society side that have been part of chairing OGP the last few years. So let's do a quick round of self-introduction. My name is Paul Maassen. I'm Civil Society Coordinator for OGP. And on my right...
Hello, everybody. Alejandro González from Mexico, from an organization called GESOC, and I'm also a member of the steering committee.
Well, I will speak in Spanish, okay? Because I love Spanish. Yo soy Yara Pietrikowski. Mi organización se llama INESC, Instituto de Estudios Socioeconómicos, organización basada en Brasilia, Brasil. Yo soy parte del Steering Committee.
Good afternoon. I'm Patrice McDermott. I am the Executive Director of a coalition of civil society groups in the United States called openthegovernment.org.
I'm Simon Burall. I'm Director of Involve, and I coordinate the UK Civil Society Network.
I'm Dadang Trisasongko, Secretary General of TI Indonesia.
I'm Juan Pablo Guerrero. I'm a former Information Commission founder with 4 commissioners of the Federal Institute of Access to Information, and right now I am the Secretary General of the Information Commission in Mexico.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Tara Hidayat. I am from Indonesia. I work with the President's Delivery Unit, and I'm in charge for strategic initiatives and international relations, and open government is one of my portfolio. I'm happy that we are now, as Indonesia, lead co-chairing the OGP.
All right, thank you. So like I said, we're going to discuss the agenda for OGP the next year and the year after. What do Mexico and Indonesia have in mind if they think about the future of OGP? The UK, when it was a chair, it started its chairmanship with a very strong vision document about their year as a chair of OGP. I don't think we have a session these days, actually, that reflects on what they achieved with their chairmanship. But that would be interesting to get that document back and see what happened. I'm sure they achieved a lot. And we can ask Simon later on. This session, in a way, for me, builds on something we did early July, where we got all the civil society organizations from Brazil, US, Mexico, Indonesia, and the UK together in one room and say, okay, how can we strategically, as civil society, work together to make the most out of OGP for open government, but also for the OGP, for the civil society network. And one of the things we concluded was that there's a benefit that civil society has in a way over government, and that's the fact that we're so well connected and we're already working in networks. So to cooperate the civil society organizations across borders, across topics, is relatively easy because the networks are in place. So one of the things I want to explore, Tara, is how do you see the cooperation between Indonesia and Mexico going? So I have two starting questions for you. One, what are your top 2-3 priorities for the chairmanship of Indonesia? What are the things you want to achieve? And the second one, how are you going to work together with Mexico the coming year?
Thank you so much, Paul Maassen. Indonesia, we had our first strategic discussion with the UK at that time. The first was in February 2013. And based on that discussions, it was a very open, honest, and fluid discussion, small group within the governance and leadership subcommittee. And we drafted already our priorities for 2013 and 2014, which is uploaded in the website, I believe, in the Open Govt Partnership website. So this time it's not a Indonesia-only vision, but it's a priorities that was shaped by the prior lead chair and together with us as a support chair. Now, in that discussion, I think we have agreed, in that Open Government Partnership has had a tremendous, great 2 years with a lot of success. We have established the foundation, established the partnership. We have strengthened the core values, and we have broadened the participation to 61 countries. So the past 2 years was more of a design and build phase of the partnership itself. Now, we together are aware that now should be moving into more of the operational phase. So for 2014, it's focused more with regard to how should we keep, one, the healthiness of this partnership, and two, the sustainability of this partnership. So when I'm implying, or what I mean by healthiness is how can we ensure that the 61 countries that have participated in Open Government Partnership makes progress towards those commitments. We call it as deepening, so we will focus on deepening, and when we say deepening, it's deepening the delivery of the commitments and the quality of the commitments, that's one. Second is deepening on the process itself, the engagement between the government and the civil society and the citizens. Those needs also to be deepened, right? And the third is also deepening the coverage. Deepening the coverage means that I think we need to be moving not only at the national level of openness, but also to the subnational level of openness. So that is our priority for 2014. And with regard to the sustainability, we also need to make sure that all of us here are all excited, inspired. We all understand the benefits of Open Government Partnership. Only then this movement and this institution becomes by itself sustainable. So that will be my comments, Paul, with regard to the priorities. Yeah.
Thank you. Juan Pablo, Mexico is the real new chair. Indonesia has already been in the chair position for a year. And you also had a presidential election the last year, which might or might not have an effect on what you do as a chair, although your president gave a very strong opening statement this morning. What are the discussions so far in Mexico about what you want to do with the presidency, the chairmanship of OGP, the coming 2 years?
First of all, thank you, Paul. We are honored by the opportunity of following up this wonderful global effort that has been launched a couple of years ago. It is true that Mexico just went through something that Indonesia is about to experience, that is general elections, where in fact was a significant change in government because the opposition party came into power. So it was at the beginning very important for us to make sure that the engagement to OGP was going to have continuity. And I have to say that in this effort, civil society was a very important stakeholder. Because the civil society organizations that were engaged in the process of OGP felt that this engagement was not the engagement of one government, but it was the engagement of the country. So I remember that after the elections, our partners from civil society were knocking door after door, trying to find the good interlocutor within government to follow up on the Mexican commitments. Another actor, another stakeholder that had a relevant role, I have to say, is the Federal Institute for Access to Information. The Information Commission, which has independence, has autonomy, so was not affected by the elections. The commissioners that were part of OGP first engagements were still there. So this was, if you want, the conditions that explain that the new government understood pretty quickly that this was not a fashion of a government, but it was really an engagement of the Mexican state. What has been, if you want, so far a happy ending has been the fact that the Federal Information Commissioner is still engaged in the process. The civil society partners are pretty much the same faces, the same actors, and that is basically organizations that have been committed with access to information and transparency for more than 10 years. And the new government has understood that this is something that, after all, might become a big opportunity for its presence internationally, but also to reach many of the goals of the new government. So it took time, but finally the Mexican government became absolutely engaged. Now, as far as the being co-chair, the idea that I have been talking with our colleagues in government is how to make sure that the model that has worked for OGP in Mexico can be replicated for the chairmanship. And here I am referring to a very peculiar form of organization in Mexico around OGP that integrates, on the one hand, the government, on the other hand, the civil society representation, but also the Information Commission as, if you want, three-leg, we call it tripartite organization, where all the decisions are discussed and are taken within that sphere. And if this has worked for Mexico engagement in OGP, it has worked for the identification of the Mexican commitments. We believe that it should work also to determine, to define the Mexican specific role as a co-chair of the global effort.
Okay, thank you. So if I listen to the both of you, I hear deepening, and with many aspects in it, deepening in making the plans and the delivery of the plans stronger. It means still working on the engagement and the partnership between government and civil society and strengthening that. And broadening the coverage, so going to other levels of government, subnational level, city level. And in a way, Alejandro and Dadang, that really resonates with the discussions we had yesterday at the Civil Society Day, where we also clearly heard it's about getting more actors involved, it's making the plans and the ambitions bigger, and it's including other levels of government and other issues. So I would say we're on the same page with the priorities, but what would you say?
Yes.
Have you been involved in shaping this chairmanship agenda, and do these priorities resonate with your priorities? Will this help you nationally, for example? And I'll start with Dadang and then you, Alejandro.
Okay, thank you, Paul. The Indonesia already published the Global Corruption Barometer 2013, and the result is we still have problem with first our business licensing, the police, land administration. There's the three main institutions we have to reform in the future. And if we compare with the our National Action Plan of OGI, I think the action plan is reflecting the situations and the need of how to reform the public sector. This, if we compare with the result of our survey. And the other is, if we look at the corruption cases handled by our anti-corruption body, almost 70% of the cases is the procurement, public procurement cases. And I think the OGI also put it into the action plan. And yes, of course, all the action plan reflecting the situations what we are facing in Indonesia.
Okay. Alejandro?
I'm pretty happy to be almost in the chair. Everybody, hello. Yeah, this is quite interesting issue, and I think that hearing what Juan Pablo and Tara has said, I believe that, as you pointed out, Paul, we have a lot of things in common. So, say that the question is, what is the role of civil society within the context of two countries that are sharing the chairmanship? An interesting one, because this is going to be the first share period where, with no UKs of the world, with no USA of the world, only two emerging economies, strong economies, transitional countries that are doing interesting things in very different regions of the world, with two different ways of understanding the world, understanding OGP, and with priorities that may come together. What I think we should do as civil society organization is what civil society does in the world. First, trying to influence the priorities of how the chairmanship is going to be held. We need to influence them. And in the Mexican side, we have been, I think, we have had very good partners in government. The dialogue has been very close. We have been able to understand this very well, and we will at least aspire to have the same type of dialogue when Mexico assumes the chairmanship, the co-chairmanship, and then the chairmanship. This is one thing. Setting the priorities, not only in naming the priorities, but also in the how to get to those priorities getting actually done. And the second thing that civil society does well around the world is, okay, keeping the feet into the fire of this. How can we get track of this? How can we raise our voice when things are not going in that direction? And how can we propose new ways of new alternatives in order to get things on track? In terms of the issues, I think deepening the partnership, the relationship between civil society and government, as Juan Pablo has said, and Tara as well, broadening the partnership, getting beyond the usual suspects, revising OGP itself in terms of the games of the rules, in terms of the incentives and in terms of the sticks, in terms of the role that IRM is going to play, crucial role for the next years. I think those are the main issues of this thing. And a lot of issues could be, for example, review. One thing is why, for instance, the eligibility criteria about civil society has the same value than the eligibility criteria of fiscal transparency, for example. Is that right? Do we want a partnership in which civil society indicators weigh the same than the indicators of fiscal transparency, for example? Just to put some incentivating the debate.
Let me, as a civil society coordinator, take that as a rhetoric question. Go into the debate. But I want to stay with you for a moment, Alejandro. You are, as some others before you, you're both in the steering committee, so actively internationally, where you have to work diplomatically with governments on things like the healthiness and the sustainability of OGP, as Tara said. And at the same time, you're a member of civil society in Mexico that has priorities, like Dadang was also pointing out, that are real issues where you want real answers and real progress. So how do you combine that, playing that role at two levels? And I want to ask sort of Dadang the same question. I want to ask with you, how do you play the role at the national and the international level? And at Dadang, I would like to hear from you, how do you organize that in Indonesia as civil society to be a faithful and realistic partner on the one hand, but also, like Alejandro said, holds the feet to the fire? So I start with you, Alejandro.
Yeah, for me, the only way to play those two roles at the same time and to survive in the process is, at the end of the day, having a very strong coalition in your country of civil society. For example, I'm not the public face of the coalition in Mexico. It's one of my colleagues, who is Hidayat. I think if she's around here. If not, I'm gonna take some answer. Because that's a good way to separate the functions and saying, okay, I'm playing this role at the international level. I'm gonna specialize myself in that, and trying to echo what is happening at the international level, but I always has been confident that what Hidayat and the rest of the colleagues are doing in Mexico is very responsive to the local context. So having this strong coalition in Mexico, civil society organizations, give me the room, for me at least, to play my role, and the opposite is also true. So without this, I will look crazy. There is no way that I can do that.
Okay, so you can't do both. You focus on the international, but of course you are grounded in the national network. And I think that's something, Yara,
voicing from one side to the other. Yeah.
When we come to you, Yara, that I think it's something I want to ask you as well, because I think you face the same thing. Dadang, in Indonesia, you're a big country. We saw the Bright Spot presentation this morning, very big country. But also with a very dynamic civil society. You're part of the core team, but there are also people outside the core team. How do you work together in balancing the different roles?
Yeah, it's very interesting working in Indonesian NGO. Actually, some member of the core team of OGI is also a member of a group outside the OGI core team. FOINI, we call it FOINI, Freedom of Information Network of Indonesia. And yes, in the reality, there is a little tension, not on the practical matters, but like some ideological debate between why we support OGP and why not support OGP. And I think, and I'm optimistic that if we intensively dialogue each other to discuss and to make regular meeting among the CSO in Indonesia, the problem not only in Jakarta as a capital city, the NGO, but we also have to reach or engage our friend in the regional. If we quote Ibu Tara mentioned about the deepening in the sub-national level, I think our future challenge is how to engage our colleagues, our friends in the local. Mm-hmm. And we are trying with UKP4, trying to engage them in some pilot projects of OGI. And the problem in the local area, I think, not only about their capacity, but also what is the OGP is. The understanding on the OGP itself is a problem in the regions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Tara, you mentioned that that OGP in Indonesia is sort of driven by this special presidential delivery unit, which one of the things we often hear about, okay, for OGP it's really important to have the political drive and the political will the right people, and you're close to the president's office. Down the line, do you think that having that special position helps you in getting the change you want? How does that work?
It's not a special president, it's just a president's delivery unit.
Okay.
Nothing too special about the president's delivery unit. Well, let me say with regard to how this delivery unit was firstly set up. The president's SBY, this is his second term. And of course, being this is second term, he will not be re-elected again in the next term. So he needs to make sure with the vice president that what he has promised needs to be delivered. So that is very high in his agenda. And he has already set national priorities. There are about 11 national priorities. I'm not sure whether that's priorities, but the number is 11, and one of them is the first one is bureaucracy reform. Now, when open government came into the picture in the landscape of Indonesia, it was back in 2010, around 2010. And at that time, as like any other countries, I think it is so much more of finding the right reformer in that particular country. And fortunately, that reformer is Minister Kuntoro, who was previously the head of the tsunami recovery body, and fortunately he is the head of the president's delivery unit, right? So it was a fortunate situation that the reformer happens to be one who is close to the president's decision-making process. Now, I think with regard of how open government Indonesia has moved and progressed so far, to some extent has the contribution of it being housed in the president's delivery unit. Because we all believe this open government is something that is not common. It is doing things differently, getting things done, but through a very innovative and business not usual way. And the only way you can get that done is if you are in alignment with the president's commitment, with the head of government, have the same aspiration and motivation in getting there. So for now, I think looking at Indonesia, very, very huge in terms of people landscape, yeah, and also in terms of bureaucracy, it's just humongous. It needs to be housed in a function. It may not need to be a special unit, but that function really needs to be close to the first number one person of the government. I know that I see it working different model in other parts of the world, like in Australia, I think it is run by the Ministry of Finance, and then in Mexico as well is the bureaucracy reform or the administrative reform ministry. There are various models, but if you ask me how it should be in Indonesia, then it should be the function should be really very close to the president and the vice president too.
Okay, thank you. Small question, final question before we move to Juan Pablo. If there's one thing you can say, that's what I learned from working with civil society the last 2 years. What is the one thing that you think, wow, they do something that's actually pretty smart?
Oops.
I ask only one.
Okay. I think Indonesia has been fortunate to have civil societies that are very understanding. They are willing to listen, right? So it is easier for us to communicate if each sides are willing to listen. And therefore, when we engage them, the civil society, since the very beginning, from the planning until the implementation and as well as the monitoring of things, we discuss it like we are friends. Yeah. So I think one of the best learnings that I have had is that they have been giving a lot of constructive constructive feedback, and also productive technical assistance, because we are engaging them directly in implementations of the action plans. So if I were to score, with regard to how government and civil society works in Indonesia, if the spectrum is between whether it's at the debate stage, it is a dialogue stage, engaged, and then partnership, yeah? I think I personally would rate our relationship right now is between engaged and partnership. That's where we are at this moment of time.
Okay, thank you. Juan Pablo, you mentioned, I think something you have in common with Indonesia is that you both have a different way of organizing OGP than other countries. Whether it's a presidential, non-special presidential delivery unit, or the tripartite that you have in Mexico. How do you see your role as being from the Information Commission? Are you an equal partner in that partnership? Are you the mediator between two enemies? How does it work in practice? What makes that model work? And do you think it's something that can be translated to other contexts?
The role has been mainly of being a facilitator of the dialogue, a mediator. I think that government agencies deserve trust. Civil society organizations deserve trust, but it takes a long time to both parties to understand that. And from this point of view, the Information Commission was a means to say, please talk to each other, this interlocutor is trustful, and just give it a try. And that helped not only because IFAI had a good relationship with both parties, but also because this Information Commission in Mexico has authority, and here I'm not meaning moral authority, it has legal authority. The decisions of the Commission are mandatory for government agencies, so IFAI is looked as a credible state institution. So I am absolutely sure that at the end of the story, both parties would have the means to trust each other, but we somehow made the way a little bit shorter. That's one thing that I would identify as quite particular from the Mexican experience. Another one is, of course, related to the topic itself. This is not the commission for, I don't know, water or sanitation. This is the commission for access to information. So OGP is very, very close to the interests of and the regulation that IFAI itself, that the commission itself produces. So that is why it was a natural bridge, if you want, between the civil society community that was or has been working on this agenda for many years and the government.
Okay, thank you. So if I listen to the both of you, there's something coming together there, which is you have to house it where the right function is, and what the function is can differ per country. But it has to make sense, right? In the case of Indonesia, it made sense because it was a powerful position and the reformer was there. In the case of Mexico, it made sense because it is a very crucial topic to the whole open government agenda. But again, also I think because a number of the right reformers were there. Before I go back to you, Alejandro and Dadang, I want to go to the past. And to get some words of wisdom.
On Halloween.
On Halloween, okay, sorry. Recent past. You don't give me the time to make the introduction. because it's always good to listen to people who have gone through it to see if they have wisdom to share. And I'm sure you have. Brazil, the US, the UK have all been chairs of OGP. The UK, in a sort of sense, the biggest real chair role from the moment that OGP really got going. But all three of you, if you hear these things, I have two questions, and I'll ask the same questions for all of you. One is, did it help you with your national advocacy agenda as a civil society organization or coalition to be chair of OGP and to also be watched by the international community? And the second question is, for your colleagues from Indonesia and Mexico, what is the one thing to do and the one thing to absolutely not do to make the chairmanship successful? Please. Let's start with Patrice.
Okay, so in terms of, did it help us with our national advocacy agenda? Yes, in the sense that it gave us a bully pulpit to talk with an administration that was already admittedly very committed. But it gave us a leverage to say, you know, you have this tendency towards openness, and here you've made these international commitments very public, and you know, we are one of the countries that started this ball rolling. I think it also provides a hammer in the sense that if they're not doing the, you know, name and shame is one of the tools that the civil society, at least in the United States, uses. And this is a bigger platform for name and shame if necessary. So, yes, it helped, but it was more additional leverage. It wasn't helped in the need to get the government to believe in openness, getting it to move forward on openness, a separate issue. Okay. Do you want to go to the others on that one first? And
Let's do that.
Okay, that'll give me a chance to think.
Exactly. Simon.
I can really only echo what Patrice said. It certainly helped with our National Action Plan. I think coming from the Cabinet Office, which is where this sat, they were very clear that they see OGP as being useful at home, but also as driving an agenda internationally. That may or may not be a positive thing from some people's perspective. And so they certainly saw that doing it right here, getting the National Action Plan process right here, was a good way of demonstrating how you might do it. And I think so the very positive conversations that we've been having with the Cabinet Office around the National Action Plan process have largely been driven by that international kind of shop window, as it were. So I think definitely.
Yara, how was it in Brazil?
Yo voy a hablar en español. Cambiar la música. No puedo hablar en portugués, entonces se va a la más próxima, ¿no? Bueno, ¿qué puedo hablar de eso? Es una pregunta es una trampa, ¿eh? Porque la tendencia es ponerme en la misma posición de los compañeros de Estados Unidos, de Inglaterra, de UK. Sí, es importante, ayuda, permitió un foco, una capacidad de organización de la sociedad, un diálogo con el gobierno, pero la sociedad civil brasileña ya estaba hablando sobre eso hace tiempo. Entonces, OGP no fue como un plus al debate que ya teníamos en Brasil sobre apertura, que es un debate que viene desde la Constitución brasileña, con consejos, con conferencias. La sociedad brasileña ven en los últimos 10 años con un proceso de participación y demandas, ¿no? Que el OGP sistematizó, pero no avanzó, ¿no? Entonces, por ejemplo, la ley de acceso a información estaba ya en el debate. OGP permitió acelerar, porque Brasil también quería estar bien planteado en este espacio. Entonces hubo una voluntad política de hacer acontecer. Entonces, en ese sentido, sí, OGP es una posibilidad de charlar de una manera más enfocada sobre el tema de transparencia, de acceso a información, de una serie de otros elementos que están conectados. Pero hay que reconocer que hay un debate mucho más largo y mucho más amplio y mucho más profundo que está vinculado a la participación de la sociedad civil sobre estos temas que no están a nivel nacional conectados. Entonces yo diría que es importante que a nivel internacional tener un steering committee que permita como que volver al país y decir, mira, ustedes tienen que acelerar sus procesos nacionales desde el punto de vista de articulación entre los diferentes espacios que ya están haciendo eso, para que OGP no se quede como un elemento aislado dentro del plan nacional y que en verdad se pueda añadir a todo el debate y ahí poner consistencia y fuerza en el proceso. Entonces, sí, ayuda, pero aún sigue en la superficie, en el sentido que queremos como sociedad civil a profundizar mucho más los temas, porque para nosotros no es solo un tema de participación, y ahí yo creo que los gobiernos tendrían que entender un poco más. Es una construcción de confianza, sí, que hay que comprender mutuamente, pero es un cambio muy sencillo del proceso de gobernanza y de distribución de poder. Entonces, eso es que se trata el tema de OGP, ¿no? Entonces, OGP no es tema de política pública, agua, temas muy candentes, salud, pero tiene todo a ver. Es parte de una cultura que tiene que ser introducida para ampliar la participación y la manera que la gobernanza está establecida. Entonces, yo diría sí, ayuda, pero aún estamos siempre con un sentimiento de que hay una falta de ambición del punto de vista de potencial que Brasil tenía en este proceso.
Thank you, Yara. So Patrice, we're back with you. Your
So I
words
think-
of wisdom.
Yeah, words of wisdom. Well, and I don't think that they're anything that you're not already doing, but our experience is that it's critical for civil society to get its own act together first. We were sort of feeling our way, the first National Action Plan, because it was sort of came over to us very late in the day. And what we've done this time is we created a draft civil society national action plan and gave it to the government. And it allowed us to get ideas in from all sorts of people, get them in a format, force us to create benchmarks and timelines, so impose discipline on ourselves as well as encourage discipline in the government. But I think otherwise, if you have disparate groups going in separately, it can create openings for the government to ignore you. So that would, if I had to choose just one thing, I think that sort of coordinated effort to get your act together and break down your own silos, in addition to breaking down the government silos.
Strong, coherent coalition.
Yes, right. And you've got those. So, so I'm not much use.
Let's do quick a conclusion, Patrice. So, Simon, I mean, what I've seen from the UK Action Plan, this sounds, probably you'll nod and say, yes, it's the same. So that one's covered. Not a piece of advice.
OGP, I think, requires a very, very different way of working. It requires all of us to step way out of our comfort zones. It requires government to come towards us and trust us in ways that you haven't been able to trust us before. And it requires us, as you say, to listen and to be able to speak to you as equals, as opposed to being outside and throwing stones at you. And I think that the one thing that I would say that you have to do, that civil society needs to do in particular, is to think about their role, somebody to think about their role as being as one of space creator that allows government and civil society to step out of their roles and into slightly different roles, in a space that is safe enough for us to have frank conversations. And I think if you don't have that, the risk is that you'll either slip into the antagonistic kind of scratchy relationship that gets nowhere, or a relationship where civil society is co-opted in some way and is therefore unable to bring other people with you. And that space creator is not a very comfortable place to be, but I think if you don't have it, then you can't get the productive friction that's required to move forwards. It requires you to be able to look each other in the eye and say, we can't do this and here is why, and then to explore ways that you can move beyond. I guess you asked us what not to do. And I wouldn't want to suggest we didn't do this, of course. We did everything perfectly. I think there's a danger of seeing the chairmanship or the National Action Plan as being the end and the milestone. And that what you do is you have this kind of amorphous, this kind of baggy bit of time in the middle. And it becomes quite difficult to make some hard choices. The bringing civil society together on a common agenda requires you to look each other in the eye and say, you know what, your agenda is not the most important one. This is what we have to work on. That's quite difficult for civil society to do because we're, by nature, working together quite consensual. Or, I think there are at least elements of that. And at the same time, if you have a baggy bit of time, it's quite hard to keep your feet to the fire as government. You need to have moments where the politics kicks in and we start bringing the matches out so we can light the fire to hold your feet against it. And you start thinking, oh, they mean this. We're going to have to move faster on this. So creating moments in time that are moments where feet get held to the fire, I think is really quite important. Chunk up the time and keep the matches visible.
Before we go to Yayara.
I think that the one thing that we didn't get the first time and that folks should insist on, and again, our structure of government is your federal systems as well, but, and we're not going to the state level, but the one thing that we really couldn't get out of the government was the points of contact in the agencies. There was a bottleneck at the White House, and it's critical that, especially when the plan moves to implementation, that civil society be able to actually go in and do that eyeballing, that face-to-face, building those relationships of trust, which one hopes had begun before. But you can't have the president or the information commissioner or whoever as a gatekeeper. If that happens, it's easy for the agencies to say, no, we don't want to do it, and the gatekeeper doesn't force them to.
Okay. Sami, you very quickly.
You said one thing, but just a second thing. We were exploring at one point finding matching funding to fund our role as the kind of space creator from government, and I'm very glad that didn't come off. Because I think it would have compromised our position with the network, and it would have made that neutral space creator much more difficult. So don't accept money from government, which means that civil society and funders have to pony up. They have to find the money. This role is not a role that can be done for free. But don't involve government money in it, because it then becomes a lot more difficult.
Okay.
Bueno, yo me parece que el tema, lo más importante, el reto o lo más desafiante de eso todo es poner un proceso que los dos se sientan corresponsables. Y para eso para mí es un desafío, un reto que no, hasta hoy, mismo en Brasil, no se realizó con todo que participamos. No se realiza ¿por qué? Porque hay un problema crítico desde el punto de vista de los gobiernos, que es la implementación. Son procesos que se generan, que movilizan miles de personas, que pone energía, que pone su energía, su vitalidad, su pensamiento, que viene, en el caso de Brasil, del plano municipal, al Estado, al federal. Hacemos conferencias con 3.000, 5.000 personas en la capital y se elige prioridades, todo orientado por el gobierno, pero se llega a prioridades que no siquiera entraran en el plan de acción. Entonces, y ahí tiene todo un problema de la desconfianza y se genera espacio. Eso me parece un punto muy problemático, que es cómo generar ese espacio de confianza que tú hablas, la construcción, un espacio que está salvaguardado para que la comprensión y la visión crítica que uno tiene del otro se pueda hacer sin generar descompasos o desequilibrios de relación, porque la propuesta es enfrentar estos tipos de desafíos que tenemos en este proceso de OGP, ¿no? Entonces, yo pienso que el punto crítico para nosotros es ese momento en que una vez hecho el acuerdo, él tiene que ser implementado. Y si no es implementado, las dificultades tienen que estar aclaradas, porque eso significa construcción de espacio de confianza. Si no, no hay deal, no hay agreement. No agreement at all. O sea, entonces, ese para mí, el punto de vista de las cosas, el punto crítico, el nodo que el tema de ese proceso viene. Por otro lado, el lado creativo y el lado que impulsiona es cuando uno ve que la charla se realiza. Ahí sí genera, incluso en términos de movilización, porque la movilización puede venir positivamente y negativamente. En el caso de Brasil, ustedes todos saben, el mundo está sabiendo, las movilizaciones que están en las calles. Y es muy increíble porque los temas que están en la calle son los temas que están en OGP, ¿no? Pero son perspectivas que están siendo llamadas de una manera muy vital, muy vitalizada, y que el gobierno no tiene una capacidad de hacerla porque no escuchó anteriormente estas demandas que ya estaban planteadas. Entonces, esas son cuestiones que yo creo que son muy críticas del proceso y que cuanto más los gobiernos sean capaces de escuchar, realizar, implementar, yo creo que el proceso gana vitalidad. Si no, tenemos el riesgo de caer a un vacío total y completo.
Thank you. So we're getting to the close of the session, and I'll do that in English so you can take off your headsets. But before I close, I want to ask Alejandro, Dadang, Juan Pablo, and Tara, the civil society people, okay, what are you going to bring to government in this chairman year? And the government people, what are you going to ask from civil society to help you with in the chairman year? And I'm thinking, should I start with the giving or the asking? Let's start with the asking. Juan Pablo, what do you need from your Mexican civil society friends to make Mexico's role work? 30 seconds.
They need to maintain the attitude and the engagement they have had so far. They have been, as you said, very understandable. They have been realistic. They have been responsible. And they have been open to failure, hoping victory, of course, but this very down-to-earth attitude has been very constructive. They also have been constructive. But at the same time, I go back to Alejandro's expression that what makes this possible for him is to know that he has a very strong coalition backing him. And when he said that, I thought he was going to say that he has a very strong tequila every night to make sure that he but it's true. It's true.
That too.
What is important here is that the civil society counterpart needs to establish very clearly where they're going to use the matches that you said have to be visible, because otherwise very easily the government might bring down the effort. And the big challenge that I see, and I think that this is different from previous experiences, at least in the case of Mexico and Indonesia, is that here you are dealing really with two agendas. The one is making sure that the global effort is still going on and is moving, and at the same time that your national commitments are reached, and there is a fruitful and a continuous dialogue about that. And if I have to point to one risk, and I have to say it in a transparent way, this is what this is all about, is that we might have the Mexican government willing to continue the agenda at the local level, at the international level, but failing in some of the commitments nationally. And this is a situation that we have not known yet. And I believe that that's going to be a big challenge for, in this case, not only the country, but the global effort as a whole.
Thank you, Pablo. Very Latin American 30 seconds. Tara.
Yes, I think with regard to Indonesia, I always have a belief that the engagement of CSO in this movement, Open Government Partnership and Open Government Indonesia movement, is like, you need two hands to clap. And if government and CSO, these two hands do not clap together, then the movement will not be making any sound, will not be resonating, will not be amplifying. So it is very important, I think, what I would like for the CSO to also be proactively engaged since the early beginning, so since the planning phase. If the government has not involved, just be frank, and why don't we set up a meeting to discuss this and so forth. So proactively engage and involve early. Second, I think it will be also good if the CSO made some ambitious commitments in open government. Ambitious commitments from their side that complements the government actions. So we will be playing in, our playing field will be complementing each other, and that will become a bigger snowball effect to the country. So I think those are the three things that I would like.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. So proactive engagement and CSO commitments. Dadang, are you ready for that?
Okay. Since 1998, it is reformation in Indonesia. Indonesian CSOs are struggling for the more transparent, more accountable government. And still now, all of our friends in Indonesia still have commitment to fight corruptions, to promote the transparency and accountability in the public sector. And actually, based on this history, with or without OGP, with or without OGI, Indonesian NGOs still have commitment to push to promote the more transparent, accountable government. And from my perspective, the OGP, OGI is it is a new opportunity for Indonesian NGO, for Indonesian CSO, because it make us more closer to the government, to the decision maker, and OGP is like a more understandable language how to reform the public sector. So I think yes, we are prepared to continuing our partnership with the government, but also in the reality, in the outside of our core team, I think always still critical voices from the CSO. And I think, yes, it is the diversity of the CSO, and it is very useful for our democracy.
Okay. Thank you. Alejandro?
Thank you, Paul. First, I will start saying that Juan Pablo did a great job putting, I think, the key elements of what the government and OGP and the Mexican chairmanship will need from CSOs in order to success on the process. Let's say that the Mexican experience wouldn't be possible without IFAI, and particularly with Juan Pablo, who has been always in the side of civil society as well and has a very good understanding of how civil society works and how difficult it is to get these two worlds together. Well, the thing that I will add to the conversation is, and I will ask to the Mexican government is, please lead. That is not an easy thing to do. We're going to be the chair at some point, and we need to lead, a government that is willing to lead, and that implies sometimes taking risks. Governments are not, well, they don't do well taking risks. So as civil society, we have to push that. For instance, what can we do in order, for example, to not see this as business as usual, and to create, for instance, we have been discussing it, a great hub of knowledge pool of how OGP could really work, putting together the experiences, the knowledge, the challenges, the failures that we have faced. That there is no such a thing right now. Why don't we do it as a Mexican government and civil society initiative? For instance, lead, please lead, and we're gonna push for that one.
All right, thank you, Alejandro. So I think it's going to be exciting 2 years. We're going to break down silos, create fire, buy matches, take risks. I think OGP is going to be very exciting. Thanks to the panelists. We all have to run down for a coffee and then run down to the plenary for the closing plenary of the day. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And thanks to Ilham for putting this all together. Ilham, you did a great job.
Thank you.